Hey gang, it's Ruben. Welcome back to the Placebo Effect podcast. In today's episode, I'm super thrilled to introduce my next guest, Mason Mennenga, who is blowing up all over the Christian YouTube. Dude has got an insane amount of followers. He's 42K and counting. Mason, glad to have you on the show, man. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, am I at 42,000 on Twitter now? Is that the thing?
You are
Wow. How about that? 42,000 just absolute dumbasses
42K.
deciding to follow me.
Oh my gosh, you're so funny. I it's one of the things that gravitated me to you is just your banter. I love the way that you just kind of go after the trolls. And so let me just kind of set the table for my audience. So y'all, so in X slash Twitter, whatever we're calling it these days, Zitter or whatever, um, there's lots of funny languages that we like to use in the Christian vein of social media in terms of calling out like some particular group of trolls, and I would like to label them just to set the vernacular for our conversation, the Theo Bros, right? And so
Yep.
folks like this, these are people that seem to allege they're Christian, at least in their bios or whatever, but they are kind of the worst of the worst. They're almost the
Yeah.
underbelly. And a lot of people that I've noticed when they're trying to just have some level of conversation as best you can on X, the trolls really kind of get under their skin, but you've kind of taken a completely different direction, Mason, and have just decided to like attack them with humor. And it's such a brilliant style. Like, what just kind of motivated you to take this approach?
Yeah, it really is, I think, an outgrowth of who I am as a human being. I have always been a person that just tries to think through every situation as funny as it can be, right? Obviously there's lots of situations in life that are very serious and they're meant to be serious and that's important. But for the most part, I just always grew up making jokes about kind of anything and everything. My dad is pretty humorous too, like he's kind of total like dad joke kind of Midwestern dad kind of vibe. And so I just picked up from, I think, some of his humor and just have always been that way. Even if you, before, even when I was still like a Theo bro myself, when I was like a conservative evangelical, when I was like 16, 17 years old, I was still trying to like make jokes on Twitter. And so I just always have been that kind of person that tries to make jokes on Twitter. Now, in terms of responding to trolls and just being really unserious with them, that's something that has developed maybe in the last, I don't know, 5, 6 years, something like that, where I just got to a point where I'm like, I could really, truly give a lot of my energy to these people and it would just take so much out of me. And that totally could be a route where I take them very seriously and try to earnestly defend my positions or try to argue with them. I could totally do that, but it just would take so much time out of, especially with how many people are constantly responding. So I was just like, what if I just don't take them seriously because I don't think their arguments and what they believe should be taken seriously. So what if I just do that
Right.
instead? And I just found that wow, that's actually really fun. Like that's actually life-giving and enjoying. So a lot of people probably think like, oh my gosh, like how do you deal with Twitter? Like it just seems like it's so much and there's just so much hate that you get and all of that. And I'm like, I honestly, I it totally bounces right off of me. Like I truly don't give any time and energy to any of the nonsense that I get on a daily basis. I just think it's all funny to me, and that's the way I engage it. And
Uh, I'm
that's just
actually
as me.
quite, I'm actually quite surprised though at the amount of replies you actually do take the time because I mean, my gosh, I I, I don't have the perspective to understand like how much bigger your responses are for a, a following as big as you have. And 42K is not a small number. I mean, let's just be honest, right? It's not a million, but 42K is like pretty substantial. So,
Yeah,
like,
that's like a big town in South Dakota.
yeah, you've got to be taking a minute to respond in whatever way you choose. So, like, how much time does this kind of take out of your day when you just get into a rat hole sometimes of even entertaining the trolls to the degree that you do?
I mean, I truly have no idea how much time I'm spending on Twitter. I'm sure I could look at my phone and
The
it gives
algorithm
me
or the
the,
analytics of
it
it,
tells
yeah.
me how much time I'm spending on it. But I truly have no idea. But I also, again, like I'm very good about just navigating life on Twitter and then navigating my own like kind of private life and everything. And so I'm pretty good about that where, when I have the time to respond to people, like I will. And then when I don't, maybe I'm hanging out with friends or I'm at church or I'm doing some sort of job thing or whatever it is, like then obviously I'm not responding to them at that time. So it just kind of depends on like what's going on in my day that day. And sometimes I'm super responsive and sometimes I'm not. And just again, it kind of depends on my day. And I just think of like Twitter as something where it's really enjoyable for me to be on. I get to connect with really, obviously there's a lot of the trolls and everything, but I get to connect with really amazing people like yourself, Ruben. So I really enjoy Twitter for that reason. So I'm just like, well, I'll just pop on and hang out for a little bit, and then when I am done, like when I've got something else going on, then I'll do that thing. So yeah, just
That
I
totally
have
makes
no idea
sense.
how much time I'm spending on it. Probably a lot, probably more than most, but I enjoy it.
No, I feel you. It's kind of like I'm not the calorie counter, but I bet if I like examined all of the like calories I'm devoting to chocolate a week, I'd probably be like, oh man, that's way too much. So no, I hear you. Sometimes ignorance is bliss. But let me start to dive a little bit into the story of Mason here. So one of the cool common jokes that you do nowadays, right, is in terms of the troll bait, as we're kind of staying on this thread for a second longer, the whole, well, I guess I need to go to seminary, right? And it's
Yeah.
funny because you did go to seminary. And what I love about this joke is that the common thing that I've noticed from, let's put it out there, the evangelical right, is for whatever reason, because the evangelical denomination has become so much of city state, right? Where there's not really like an organized body. Everybody kind of feels like they're their own leader. I mean, all pastors are essentially their own head of state, right? But it's
Right.
it's gotten to the degree where down to the flocks, right? A lot of people feel like, well, I just read the Bible in a year and now I'm an expert kind of thing, right? And so there's a
Right.
lot of people that just feel way too hyper confident in what they may understand about this or that within the context of the Bible. And so when you throw that joke out there, I guess if I go to seminary, I'll know more what I'm talking about. And they take the bait every time, and I freaking love it. But so let's let's hear that kind of backstory. Tell us a little bit about you went to seminary, and I think you actually are working in academia in this area. So let's take a minute to hear that.
Yeah. Really, the short answer is yeah, I started I grew up in conservative evangelicalism. If that isn't obvious enough for those who follow me, yeah, I grew up in that world. I grew up in South Dakota, so not only was it like conservative evangelicalism that was like very much a conservative environment that I was in, but it was also in South Dakota, which is just naturally very conservative. So yeah, I just grew up in like really kind of a rural area in South Dakota and yeah, grew up with kind of the prototypical conservative evangelical world. It wasn't like overly Calvinist, if I remember right. Like I definitely got into a Calvinist phase, but the church that I grew up in definitely wasn't a Calvinist church. It was kind of just very milk toast, kind of evangelical type of people. I there was a guy that like worked at or was a part of my church that was a part of the Billy Graham organization, and just it was that kind of like big mega church type of vibe. And so that was the world that I grew up in. And when I was in later part of high school, even though I was very, very involved in youth group, I just kind of got to a point where I was starting to have some doubts about different things, both about like politics, about purity culture, a variety of different things about just kind of evangelical core beliefs. And so I just was starting to have some of those doubts. But still went to a very conservative evangelical college in Iowa, partly because I wanted to be a youth pastor. Like even though I had been having these doubts about my faith, I was still like very, very passionate about like being a part of young people's lives and helping them through just the nonsense that can high school and middle school can be. Like that was something I was really passionate about because I had a really great experience with my youth pastors. And so I'm like, I would love to be that for other young people. So yeah, I wanted to be a youth pastor. And so the college I went to had a youth ministry major, and I also wanted to play football, and they offered me a football scholarship. So I was like, well, I guess I'm going to this school. So I went to this conservative evangelical college, and still remember one of the first classes I ever had. I started reading a book called Postmodern Youth Ministry. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, I don't know what postmodern means, but I know that I'm not supposed to like that word. So I was just like a little confused about, okay, why is this postmodern word connected to youth ministry? Like, what does that mean? But because it was a required book for one of my classes, I obviously read it. And I realized really quickly the author of that book was asking a lot of similar questions I had been asking myself for the last year or so. Just, questions around like the nature of like how faith and politics should, be navigated, purity culture, human sexuality, all sorts of different things. So he just was naming a bunch of different kind of questions that I've been asking myself. And I'm like, oh my goodness, there's literally one other Christian out there in the world that has the same kind of doubts and questions about their faith as I do. So I was like, okay, at least there's one other one. And then I remember I like Googled his name, and on like the Google related search bar thing, it said something like, it like named people like Rob Bell and Brian McLaren and Nadia Bolz-Weber and Rachel Held Evans. And so I'm like, okay, well, at least there's like five other people that are having doubts and questions about their faith like I am. And so I started following those people and started reading their books. And then I realized really quickly, like, oh, wait, there's like thousands upon thousands of people kind of like me. So that was really kind of comforting to know that I wasn't the only one. So yeah, my faith really started changing a lot while I was in college. Again, grew up very conservative evangelical, and then just started to learn about the breadth and depth of the Christian tradition and how different Christians have thought about different things about atonement theories or about hell and heaven and about a purity culture and sexuality and all sorts of different things, right? So started learning all about all the different ways Christians have thought about these things. And I just was like, oh wait, like there isn't just one particular way I have to be Christian. Like I can still be a Christian and think about things differently than the Christianity I'd grown up in. And yeah, I just really got very passionate about all of that. Still wanted to do youth ministry, and then after college, went to seminary, and that's when I got more exposed to liberation theology and process theology and a variety of other different theologies. And yeah, just I've kind of remained on that road. That was when I started my podcast. That was kind of when I started getting really active on Twitter. And yeah, that's kind of a little bit of my story. And yeah, and now I work for a seminary, and that's really important to what I do in the world. And so, yeah, that's kind of a little bit of my story in a nutshell.
Nice. Liberation theology. I've never heard that before. What is liberation theology?
Yeah, so liberation theology, there's a variety of different kind of liberation theologies, but essentially it comes down to thinking about theology through the lens of people who are oppressed and, wanting the liberation of oppression from oppression. And so liberation theology sort of from an academic sense started in the 1960s in Latin America. And so that was kind of the originators of liberation theology. So it was a variety of different Latin American, mostly Catholic priests that were starting to think about, we've been colonized, and there's all of these different kind of class things going on around like the rich and the poor, and what does it mean for people who really care about their faith? What does Christianity have to offer people who are poor and oppressed and colonized? And so these priests started thinking about Christianity through that lens. And then around that time, too, a number of Black theologians were thinking about liberation theology from the Black experience, the Black American experience in particular, of, this is like around the time of the Civil Rights Movement. And so James Cone is probably the most well-known Black liberation theologian. And so he started thinking about what does the Christian faith have to offer people, Black people in America, and to talk about their oppression and think through the lens of their oppression. And so, yeah, that's kind of a little bit of liberation theology in a nutshell. And again, like there's a variety of other kind of offshoots of liberation theology that have kind of since emerged since the 1960s. There's queer theology, there's womanist theology, there's a variety of other kind of liberation theologies. But yeah, it kind of started in the 1960s, mostly with Latin American Catholic priests, and then also around that same time, some Black theologians, most notably James Cone.
Thank you for the education. And I'm going to look up James Cone after we're done.
Yeah.
Um, so how have you felt the formal study of the Bible has helped shape your walk with Christ?
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that I really loved about learning the Bible in college and learning the Bible in seminary was just how much there is to the Bible beyond just the written text, right? It's helpful to, read the Bible, have, memorize some verses and all of that. I think that's great and helpful. And also, there's just so much more going on to the Bible than just that. And so, learning about the historical context of each of these passages in the Bible, learning about the theological context, learning about the literary context, learning about all these kind of different pieces of the context of the Bible, both again in college and seminary, just really illuminated like the Bible in an entirely different way, right? So instead of reading the book of Revelation as like, oh, this is going to be some sort of historical event that will happen in my lifetime, especially if things get bad enough and is going to come back and it's going to be kind of this rapture type of event like described in Left Behind, you know, instead of reading the book of Revelation in that way, I started realizing, wait, like the book of Revelation is totally a critique of the Roman Empire, which at the time was the largest and the most powerful empire in the world. And here are a bunch of writers who are under the occupation of the Roman Empire, and they're talking about it in a way that's critiquing it. And and then, that to me was like, wait, like I live in America, which is the most powerful empire of our world today. Like, what does the Book of Revelation then have to say about living under empire, knowing that empires never left, right? Like the Roman Empire existed then, and now we've got the American Empire now. And so the book of Revelation totally, completely changed when I realized and learned about that context, right? And so learning just about the different contexts of the Bible, again, the literary context, the theological context, the historical context, the political context, there's just so many different contexts that are going on in the Bible. And so it just really made me more passionate about the Bible has so much to speak to us today in our lives. And because so many of the stories that were happening in the Bible are the stories that are happening in our lives today. Stories about empire, stories about oppression, stories about love, stories about sexuality, stories about war, stories about famine, right? There's so many of these different kind of stories that are going on in the Bible. And I think those stories can speak to us today and how we should live in the world. So the Bible and learning more about the Bible, both in college and seminary, just made me fall in love with it even more, especially with how much it can speak to beyond just my own individual life.
Wow. And actually, I've noticed one theme that you've been really passionate about lately. Obviously, this topic of immigration comes up,
Yeah.
particularly during an election year, right? We're in the US, it's
Hmm.
2024. That's definitely a hot topic. And I've noticed you've been being an advocate in terms of how we should look at it from a Christian lens, right? And one post that you did that I actually didn't know until I saw your post is that apparently the Bible actually has a lot to say about migrants. And maybe you could take a second to give us a couple of those.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's verses in Leviticus. I mean, there's just verses throughout the entire Bible about welcoming the stranger, welcoming the foreigner, welcoming the sojourner. And there's, a variety of different reasons why those passages were written by different authors. But yeah, there's just so many verses about welcoming those who are different from us in the Bible, and far more than there are about anything about sexuality, right? There's only maybe 6 verses in the Bible about homosexuality, and there are hundreds of verses about welcoming the sojourner, welcoming the immigrant, welcoming the foreigner. And so there's just so much more to, if you just wanted to look at the Bible and just see, okay, well, like what is important in the Bible, one of those kind of maybe like top 5 things that is talked about the most is welcoming the stranger, welcoming the foreigner in the Bible. And oftentimes when I bring up things like that on a place like Twitter, a lot of the Theo Bros, the aforementioned Theo Bros, a lot of them, talk about it. Well, of course I support legal immigration or whatever. And the thing is like, no, they don't. Like there are certain policies that the U.S. constantly brings up about trying to make immigration easier and trying to make that process, that legal process of why people are entering in the country without going through the legal process, trying to make that process easier for people. And those same people that claim that they support legal immigration try to make the process even harder, right? So like, no, they are not trying to welcome the immigrant. And when we do have those immigrants that come through, whether they went through the legal process or not, these are also the same Christians that demonize them, or dehumanize them. We saw the story recently around from JD Vance just making up a story about how like Haitian immigrants were eating pets, and it's like that is just complete nonsense. Like the reason why they're bringing that up is to dehumanize immigrants, right? And so
Well, they're
again, like if
they're eating the dogs is quite a viral video now. They put it to music and everything. So
I know, yeah, it's just like it's really just completely got its life of its own. But yeah,
right,
it's just one of those things where they're dehumanizing people, even regardless of whether they went through a legal process or not. And so that's where I'm
yeah,
just like, the Bible says so much about welcoming the foreigner, welcoming the immigrant. And I just think we just try to make that process as easy as possible and try to be as generous and as possible to people that are going through a massive like life. Like I can't even imagine like coming to a country not knowing its language, not having really any resources available to you, not just monetarily resources, but like you don't have a home, you don't have a job likely, like you just don't have all these certain things, and like that is a risk. And the only reason why somebody does that is for the hope of a better life for themselves and for the future generations that come after them. Like
yeah.
that's an amazing gift that they're offering to us, is that they have that much hope for a better future. And the least we can do for somebody that's offering that gift of hope to us is to try to take care of them and try to make this life a little bit better for them. I just do not understand this whole like the even when I was like super conservative, I never really understood why do we dehumanize people that are literally just trying to make a life better for themselves and for their children and their grandchildren. Like I just don't
Well,
understand that. It makes
and
no sense other than the
I
fact that like
know.
you are upset and non-white people are coming into this country and you just hate non-white people. Like
Well, and I think it's
literally,
so.
I think is what it boils down to.
Well, and I think it's so funny how in your defense of this, right? What some of the like trollish responses. Well, how many migrants are you housing? And you're like three.
Yeah, like I mean, like I've certainly helped with many immigrants, both with my church. I mean, one of the things that, and I mentioned this the other day, was there's a whole movement that's existed for a number of decades now that's mostly by churches of it's called the sanctuary movement, and churches can use their kind of protections a little bit of being a religious institution. They can use that protection to house migrants. Now, that doesn't mean that like if somebody's being threatened to be deported, like certainly the deporters, I don't know what the like I don't know if it's ICE or whatever, that like they can
Yeah.
certainly still come to a church and deport a person, but there are certain protections that churches have that like an individual residents don't have. And so that's why this whole sanctuary movement exists. And it just would be a PR nightmare if like ICE just broke into a church one day just to like take a person, right? And ICE doesn't want that kind of PR. Like they're dumb, but like they're not that dumb. And so yeah, that's just like one of the many ways that churches even for a number of decades now have helped immigrants, and that's something that I've been a part of as well. And so yeah, it's just like there are so many different ways to help immigrants, and yeah, the people that claim that they want to welcome legal immigrants or whatever are doing nothing to actually make that process easier, and nor are they actually doing anything to help the people that do come here through some sort of legal process.
Right. Yeah. And actually, I found myself, and happen to go to a church where, thank goodness, our pastor has been very consistent in making us be a Christ-focused and centered church body. He's like, we're not a left church, we're not a blue church, we're not a red church. We are a Jesus church. And in maintaining that walk, what I have found myself is I have actually probably put, and properly so since being a Christian, um, some things that I would say, like I used to be the kind of person that was a lot more the word I would use patriotic. I was a lot more very strong USA, USA, America kind of guy.
Right.
And I'm I'm Team Jesus now. That's who I am.
Right.
And it has found me drift quite a bit from the right in some of these areas. Um, and in this context, right, especially when we're talking about, well, what is the role of the Christian? It should be, you know, you help the downtrodden and the suffering, and you should not be concerned with their legal or illegality within the context of, well, are you defending your U.S. citizenry first and that sovereignty first, or are you trying to just be like who Jesus calls you to be, right? Because one of the things that I love to think about, and even when I try to get into the trails a little bit, Mason, is I think about it in terms of like, show me where in the Bible was anybody advocating for Roman laws or defending the Roman government as, followers of the way. They didn't care about
Mm,
any of that stuff. They weren't trying to protect the sovereignty of the Roman government or even even whatever was happening with respect to the governing body of the Sanhedrin, right? They were just trying to do what Jesus called them to do, and to heck with those authorities. And that's how I think we need to continue to be mindful of that in today's world is what do you need to be doing to help your fellow mankind first? And if you're worried more about like protecting your US sovereignty, then you're definitely like elevating your patriotism over God, right?
yep. Yeah, I mean, these are the same people that have like Christian husband, father in their Twitter bio in that order, right? And so they first identify as a Christian. Well, if you first identify as a Christian, and second off, like they don't have American usually in that bio, right? So if your allegiance is to Christ as a Christian, then your allegiance is to doing the things that Christ would have done, which, in my opinion, is to, or, from my interpretation of Jesus, is to help the least of these, right? And that doesn't matter whether that least of these is an American citizen or not. That's not, Jesus doesn't say anything about that, doesn't give a rat's ass about whether or not somebody was an American citizen. And so I just really have like no patience for somebody that just sees somebody who's really struggling and needs help and just say, well, what's their legal status first before I give them help? Like, I just think that's absolutely preposterous. Like, that it's just absolutely antithetical to who Jesus is. And so, if your allegiance is to Jesus, then your allegiance is to helping the least of these. And it's not to helping the least of these who are Americans or not. Like, that's not at all what Jesus is asking for us to do as Christians.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's come back to the lighthearted side of things because I am, uh, at least in terms of my walk with God, is relatively new in the span of things. I'm over 50 years old, but I've only been a follower of Christ for about 8 years now.
Okay.
And so one of the jokes that you do that I don't get is when it comes to Reliant K, I've noticed your funny little joke about it. You can't call yourself a Christian if you don't know who Reliant K is. Now I gotta raise my hand, Mason. I don't know who Reliant K is. School me on this. Who is Reliant K?
Oh, oof. If you
Do I lose my Jesus card because I don't know who they
yeah,
are?
you just, you might be a heretic now. You just might be a heretic. So Reliant K is one of the greatest bands to ever exist in the world. I don't remember what year. I think they started maybe in like 1997, 1998, something like that. And they're like a pop punk band. So I don't know if you ever really got into pop punk from like 20 years ago or not.
I like me
You
some
probably
Green
been a
Day. So
yeah, I mean, it would have been like kind of like think of them as like almost like a
the
Christian
Christian Green
version of
Day.
Green
Okay,
Day or a
okay.
Christian, maybe actually, maybe sonically they even probably are a little bit closer to like Blink 182 because they definitely had a lot of like kind of funny songs. Like Blink 182 definitely has like a lot of just joke songs, and especially early on, Reliant K kind of did some joke songs as well. So yeah, sonically and like stylistically, they probably be a little closer to Blink 182 if you ever got into them. So just think of them kind of as like a Christian version of Blink 182, but I just think they're just like take the Christian thing out of it or not, like I don't care. Like they are just objectively, I think, a better pop punk band than Blink 182. Like just their maturity and their sound is like just so much better. They got their sound just like became they were able to transcend just like the pop punkness of their original sound. Like they were able to dive into like indie sounds, and they were able to dive into like a more alternative sound and like a piano rock sound, and they just like did a lot of really cool, interesting things that even like Blink-182 never did. So I just really appreciate them for that. So yeah, they're an incredible band, like just extremely talented, probably the best. Matt Thiessen, their lead singer and songwriter, he is arguably, like, I kid you not, doesn't matter the genre, probably one of the greatest bridge writers ever. I don't know if you know like song
Yeah, yeah,
structure at
yeah,
all, but
yeah.
like there's usually a lot of times there's songs have a bridge. He is just so good at writing bridges. And from like friends of his that I don't know him super well, but friends of his that I do know really well, often like I've brought that up. I'm like, this dude really writes bridges really well. And they're like, oh, he's super intentional about that. Like he really tries hard to actually write a really good bridge. And I think it really pays off. Like I genuinely think he's an incredible bridge writer. So there's just like a really talented band. I really, really love Reliant K.
All
So
right,
yeah,
I'm gonna go check out Reliant K on Spotify and YouTube
there you go.
Music and see what's going on. You've
Yeah.
talked them up, so now I want to go check them out.
Yeah.
And speaking of music, looks like the other big thing that you're into is you are a co-host of a podcast called the Black Sheep Podcast,
Yeah.
which seems to be real focused on music
Yeah.
conversation. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's my best friend and I. We've been best friends for how long now? 16 years, at least 16 years, maybe going on 17, I think. So we've been best friends for over half my life. I'll just put it that way. Over half my life, we've been best friends, and so we really connected because of music. We had a really kind of common interest of bands that we really like, mostly bands that were kind of like alternative Christian bands, like Reliant K. And so, yeah, we just have been best friends for a long time. And about like 6 or 7 years ago, we decided, you know what, like let's start a podcast. And then that kind of formed into us like eventually getting connected with a lot of these bands. And we're just like, well, let's have conversations with some of these bands that we like have loved throughout our lives. And so, for the most part, most of the bands that we interview are bands that we're like genuinely like really big fans of. And so yeah, that's kind of what we do. We just chat with bands. A lot of times it's bands that are like releasing new album or they're going on tour or whatever, so they're trying to promote something. So yeah, it really is just for us to like hang out with bands that we really love, and yeah, it's just a really fun time.
Nice. And how often are you pumping out content on that podcast?
Every Tuesday, every Tuesday morning.
Every Tuesday. All right. So as a fellow YouTuber, I definitely want to give you your plugs. Tell us how people can find you, Mason.
Yeah. Yeah, so I have a website, masonmennenga.com. Check it out there. I mean, you can find everything that I do from there. You can find my Twitter, you can find my Instagram, YouTube, all the things. So, yeah, I also do have some merch where if you really like some of my tweets, you can get it on a t-shirt or a sticker of your choice. And so, yeah, if you happen to really like one of my tweets and you're like, I'd wear that on my body, then you're in luck. You can do that. So, yeah, check out my merch. Follow me on YouTube. I haven't posted for a couple months, and I will be getting back to that as soon as I can. There's just been like some new job stuff that's happened that has taken a lot of my time, but I plan on getting back into doing more YouTube stuff here very shortly.
Excellent. I like your content. See, I'll make sure you check him out on YouTube. Also, check out the Black Sheep podcast if you're into music. Mason, my new bestie on Twitter/X. It was super great having you on, buddy. Thank you so much for coming on the channel. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you so much.
God bless you, man.
All right, gang, that's it for this episode. If you like my content, please consider subscribing to my channel. God bless you guys.